Ooh, welcome, everybody. Welcome back from break. Come on in. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Slides are already up. Make sure you got your notes ready to go. We'll get started with what we're going to talk about very shortly. Hopefully, you all had a great break. They're ready for some good old-fashioned history class. My break was good. Thank you for asking. Very restful. About 1 more minute, and then we're going to get started talking about all this stuff. Thank you, Donovan. How's it going, Roman? All right. Let's see where we're at.
How you doing, Mr. Cavazos?
I'm doing good, Gio. How are you?
I'm tired.
It's been a long day. Day's almost over, though. All right, guys. About a minute before we start. Thank you. Thank you, Roman. Make sure that you are notes ready and ready to go because we got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. I want to see how far into this we get. It is 2:25, so for the sake of time, I'm going to get started already, so make sure you are good to go. Objective, we're going to talk about government policy during the Reconstruction era. The Reconstruction era is believed to have been from 1865 through 1877. We will talk about what Reconstruction means and a bunch of other things before. We're going to talk about Lincoln's plan today. We're going to talk about the plan that Lincoln canceled today, and we're going to talk about a few other things. We're going to see how far we get today. Now, make sure your notes are prepared. Make sure you've replied present in Teams and on Zoom. Now, one thing before we start, and I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to get the terms down, to get the objective down, and to do this in the chat, publicly or privately, doesn't matter. What do you remember from last week? What did we talk about? Don't give me like specifics. I don't want like a paragraph. What did we talk about last week? And if you don't remember anything, just put no clue. Turkey wiped my memory. Don't remember anything. That's fine. Got some Civil War. That's Civil War. We talked about Civil War, yeah. What else? You knew Civil War, yep. History stuff. Lincoln. We did talk about Lincoln, right? I'm glad somebody remembers that. Gettysburg, yeah, started the Civil War. Advantages, yep. Oh, no, not that. Come on, man. Oh, yeah, we are killing Lincoln today. Assuming we get there. He's your slave act compromise. Okay. So some of us are in the right place. Some of us not so much. Some of us, but I do not have too much time to spend going over what we covered last week again. So hopefully you kept good notes. If you kept good notes, reference them. At the end of this week, the review packet I'm making will be ready, and it'll be available digitally. I'll have it here in school, and I'll figure out a way to see if I can get some time for you guys to pick it up. Hey, Jonathan, how you doing? So make sure that you are keeping good notes. Make sure you're keeping good notes today because today's topic is going to basically be about what we're talking about for the rest of this week till we start reviewing. My hopes are that we can start reviewing Thursday, but we'll see how that goes. So with that being said, let's get into it. Let's get started. It is 2:27. Most of us are in here, missing a few people, but a good amount of us are here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So Reconstruction is what we're talking about. First key point. First key point is up. Reconstruction altered relationships between the states and the federal. This led to debates over definitions of what citizenship was, specifically regarding African Americans, women, and other minorities. What does it mean to be a citizen? That is the debate that will but change the relationship between the state and the federal. It will change forever from this point forward. It will not be the same. And we will talk about why and how by the end of this. So it might not be today, but it will be soon. So I'll give you about 2 minutes for this first key point. Make sure you got that first key point down, and we're going to get into this. About a little less than a minute left. By the way, if you are using the slides from Google Classroom, be careful because they might be out of order. It's the same slides, but they might be out of order. So if you like to use those, make sure don't get too ahead because the order is a little different than the slides. I made the slides last week. So about 30 seconds left. And again, if there are any questions as we're going through this stuff, please don't hesitate to type in the chat so we can stop and make sure we get this through. All right, let's go to move forward. So, what is Reconstruction? It's an attempt to rebuild and reunite the nation after the destruction, distrust, and end of the Civil War. Right? If you remember, can anybody name the general that burned down like half of Georgia and some of South Carolina? Remember his name? Named a tank after him. If no, then give me some no's. Not Stonewall, he's a Union general. No, come on, Brian. It's okay if you don't know, but put no, because you got to know his name. It's important. Got to know what he did. It was a march to the sea, Union general, burned down most of Georgia. Not most, but a good chunk of Georgia, a good chunk of South Carolina. No clue? Okay. His name was Sherman, right? William Tecumseh Sherman. And no, that's one of the good ones. Tecumseh Sherman was one of the good ones. Late in the war, he burned down most of the South. And so what my point by mentioning him again is there's literal destruction in the sense that guys like Sherman burning down plantations. And then there's more of a like figurative destruction, right? Like distrust. The South is now defeated. And now there's this weird thing of like, you're not in the Union yet because you rebelled, but we want to be friends and we're trying to get the Union together. Because what was Lincoln's primary goal at the start of the Civil War? Doesn't stay his goal, but what's his first goal? His favorite thing, the first thing he wants to do when the Civil War starts. The reason he starts the Civil War so quickly is he wants to do what? Maintain the Union. Good. So what you get here is this weird era where the Confederates are defeated, the government's gone, and you got guys like Lincoln that want to put the Union back together, but it's not that easy. Why isn't it that easy? What problems will emerge if you take those Southern leaders and just put them back in places they were before? What's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen? What could happen if that happens? If you just took the Southerners that were already in charge before and pushed them over, what do we think? You don't know, but you got to type something. What would happen? Don't know. Don't know. Don't know. Okay. So, basically, what people are trying to avoid are the same problems that got us into war to begin with. They're trying to avoid the same issues coming up again. If you put the same people in charge that were in charge before the Civil War, it's not like their opinions change just because they got beaten in a war, right? They're still the same people. They still feel the same things. Not to mention, what did the Union make sure was gone? By the time the Civil War ends, what amendments been passed? What's gone? That was around before. Big reason. Slavery's gone, right? Slavery's gone. So not only do you not want the people that were the slave owners in charge anymore, you want to make sure that you don't have people in government that are already going to be really angry and upset and ticked off that they're there, that they lost and sour. So you got to give states a path to get back to becoming states, get back into the Union. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't put the old governments back in power. Make sense? Yes, no? This is the dilemma. You get some yeses or nos. Does that make sense? Because if it doesn't make sense, I need to try to explain it a different way. But the issue is, how do you get old Confederate states back into the Union fairly, equally? Got a couple of yeses there. So if you have any questions, let me know. So what are you writing here? That first point, you got to write it. That's what Reconstruction is. This era is that. I would point out that there are phases in Reconstruction. So very early on, while the war is still being fought, Lincoln has his very own detailed plan for how Reconstruction will happen. What's going to happen to Lincoln? Somebody tell me or type it. What's going to happen to Lincoln? What's going to make this plan not happen? Trick shot. He's going to catch a bullet, right? And when he catches that bullet, his plan kind of goes with him. And I have a really good analogy for that in a bit. 360 no scope. So once Lincoln's gone, this very difficult task, this near impossible task, is now going to have to be done by somebody else. And ultimately, when all is said and done, Reconstruction will be a failure. Reconstruction will fail. Alt-delete's a good one. So I'll give you a quick minute and a half for that first bullet point to point out that it's going to be phases, and to point out that without Lincoln, this plan's really hard to pull off. And you can even add, right, it's going to fail. No Lincoln. Lincoln's your only chance at Reconstruction. And I'll show you kind of what I mean by that in a second. By how without Lincoln, it's kind of really hard to get this done. So about a minute and a half. If you need more time than that, let me know, because if not, I'm going to move on to an example that hopefully will make this, have this make sense. Just unplugged. Yeah, it was rough. It was Lincoln dying when he did is probably I'm not going to say it's why Reconstruction failed, but it definitely was the best chance at Reconstruction succeeding. And it was over the second that Lincoln was assassinated. So before I get into what Lincoln's plan was, and I'm about to move on in 20 seconds, so if you need more time, let me know. Before I get into what Lincoln's plan was, I want to kind of give you a little bit of a silly but a good example, I think, of what this is going to look like post Lincoln's assassination. All right, so the best way I can do this, and I'm trying to have some fun with this, but it's true really, is that Reconstruction, imagine if Gordon Ramsay planned this amazing meal for a huge party, like hundreds of people. Gordon Ramsay planned it, he's going to make it. Then a guy named John Wilkes Booth shows up and messes this plan up because he kills Gordon Ramsay, assassinates him. Now you have a guy named Andrew Johnson, who you've never heard of before. He's also a racist, and now he's got to cook this meal. That's Reconstruction's the meal. It's this really difficult thing that's really intricate and requires a lot of finesse and a lot of really strong leadership and a lot of really capable people. But it's Lincoln's plan. Only Lincoln knows how to pull it off, right? Or at least Lincoln's plan to pull it off seems like the fairest. But when he dies, there's nobody around to do it. And the guy that's around to do it's this guy, and he's a racist Democrat that kind of hates rich people. And he's not going to be able to do it at all. And he's basically, he's going to be like a, what is it, idiot sandwich? You got an idiot sandwich cooking instead of Gordon Ramsay cooking, and it's a big mess. And it's going to be fumbled. And there's going to be really bright spots that are going to mess all this up. So we're going to get into it in a second. So let's talk about Lincoln's plan. You don't need the first part. You need to know that Lincoln thought secession was illegal. So because he thinks it's illegal, he wants to proclaim different policies to help the different states and make sure that what they did wasn't okay and that they're going to move forward. He would grant a full pardon to Confederates who took an oath of allegiance and swore to accept the end of slavery. So he would pardon people of their crimes as far as Confederates go. And then he had something called the 10% plan. You need to write down the last parts, the 10% plan and the pardons. Confederate states would be reestablished once 10% of voters affirmed loyalty to the Union. Confederate officials and high-ranking officers would be unable to hold office or vote. So if you were in the Confederate government, you would not be able to hold office, you would not be able to vote. But if you were a regular person, you could still vote, could still hold office. And they were it was a way to get rid of all those old Confederates. They can't hold office anymore. What do you need to write again? You need full presidential pardon and everything beneath it. That's what you need to write down, right? And this is Lincoln's plan. It's called the 10% plan or Lincoln's plan. So I'll give you about a minute and a half. Again, 10% of voters affirm allegiance and loyalty, and then we're able to move on. %, promise to be good to the Union, and then the state's allowed back in. Old Confederates are not in office anymore. This is Lincoln's plan. These are the basics, but most important parts of Lincoln's plan. About 45 seconds. If you need more time than that, let me know. More time? Okay. We'll do another minute. Again, this is Lincoln's plan. It's a really good plan. It's a plan he spent a lot of time working on because by the time you hit, I want to say 64, the Union knows they're going to win the war. It's a matter of when, right? And he, like we talked about last week, I know it's hard to remember stuff from last week. Lincoln's a really good wartime leader. He's a very strong leader. And I'm not saying he would have pulled it off because it's impossible to know, but he definitely might have. And the biggest part I want to point out is this part right here. Where is it? Where's my mouse? I lost it. There it is. He wasn't going to let Confederates hold office anymore. So if you were in a state legislature during the as a Confederate, those people were going to be out of a job. They weren't going to be allowed to run governments anymore. What do you think is going to happen when you got somebody else who doesn't want to do this in charge of Reconstruction? You think they're going to take the time to point out that, hey, you're a Confederate, you can't be here, right? Especially if it's a guy like Andrew Johnson, who we'll talk about in a little bit, who's a Southern Democrat and a little bit racist. And when I say a little bit, I mean a lot of racist. Think that guy's going to care if Confederates are in charge or not? Yes, no, maybe so. Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Let's move on. So the slide before this one, no. Okay. So phase one, Wade-Davis bill, 1864. This is still pre the end of the war, but there's radical Republicans, and we're going to get into who those are in a bit, believe former Confederate states should be punished. They did not believe in forgiving the other Confederates and letting them back in quickly. 50% of Southern voters had to swear an ironclad oath. That's what it was called, an ironclad oath. No Confederate soldiers or officers could vote or hold office, not just major officials. And they wanted civil rights safeguards in place for African Americans. This plan was pocket vetoed by Lincoln because he thought it was too extreme. Now, here's something that you will need to write if you don't know what it is. Pocket veto. A pocket veto is when the president doesn't sign doesn't sign the bill, but he also doesn't veto it. He just lets it sit there, and eventually it goes away. So this bill will be pocket vetoed by Lincoln. He's not going to say no to it, but he's not going to sign it either, which is another way of saying no without saying no, because he thought it was too intense. So you need to know the provisions of the Wade-Davis bill. This is another plan for phase one. This plan will not go into effect because Lincoln doesn't sign it. It's about 2 minutes on there because you need all of the provisions for it, and you need the first point as well. You pretty much need this whole slide. About a little less 2 minutes. Again, this is the Wade-Davis bill. About a minute and change. If you need more time, let me know. We got about a minute left. This was the belief that Confederates should be punished. Radical Republicans supported this bill. It did not get approved because Lincoln pocket vetoed it. And again, if you don't recognize that term pocket veto, write it down. It's when the president doesn't sign a bill, but also doesn't veto the bill. He just kind of ignores it. He puts it to the side. He puts it in his pocket, lets it fade away. That's a pocket veto. You're going to need that later. That's important. $20 seconds. All right, let's go to move forward. So Lincoln's elected again, right? He's reelected in 1864, and he gave a second inaugural address. This is one of the more famous speeches that he gives. So two things. I'm going to play a clip from the film. I think it's from the film of Lincoln actually giving the speech because it's a really short clip. It's like a minute and a half long. And then I'm going to come back to this piece right here. I want you to tell me what he's talking about, because he's talking about something. What is it? So first, let me pull that clip up.
Do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. As God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Still muted. There we go. So I believe that was from the film. I think that's after he's assassinated too, which is why it's all grainy and like sad. But so here's what I need you to do now. This piece is the ending. It's like the last 30 seconds of it. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Here's what you need to do, and listen closely because there's 60 in here. You need to send me privately what this is talking about. If you don't send it, it's not going to count. This is half of your exit ticket because your exit ticket's super short today. All you got to do is send it in the private chat. What is Lincoln talking about here specifically? He mentions wounds, mentions battle, he mentions no malice, he mentions charity. What is he talking about and why? Send it to me privately in the chat. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Actually, I'm going to give you 4 minutes to give you time to read it and to tell me what it means. If you don't send it to me and we move on and I don't get it in this chat by the time we're done here, you're not getting credit. So just make sure you focus up, make sure you send it in. So I'll give you 4 minutes. Read through that. What is he talking about? Make sure you send it privately. Four minutes and then we'll move on. Isaac Solid, yes. Let me see. Isaac and Emiliano, yes, but specifically who? Who? Isaac Good, yeah. Brian, specifics, because he's talking about somebody specifically. It's 1864. I think you're right the first time. But he is talking about both of them together, so careful with the one-word responses, because if you don't explain them, you're shooting yourself in the foot. But yes, together. What else? About a little less than 3 minutes. Good, good. I like what I'm seeing. Yes, Brian, solid. Alexis, good response. Michaela, good response. Eric, yes, solid. Good job, Eric. Zach, yes. Here you go. Hope that's a joke because you're off by a mile. If you're not completely sure, try to take a guess. I'd appreciate an attempt. It's okay if you're not spot on, but try to get something in there that's close. At least what you perceive it as. All nations, okay. We're at about a little less than a minute left, about 45 seconds left. If I move on and you're still typing out your response, send it in, because if I don't have it in here, it's not going to count. Like peace, that's good. Freedom's good. All right, guys. Thank you to those who have participated and those who are putting in those responses. Keep doing it if you have not already. I don't want anybody to lose points for just not sending this in. I didn't see too many people that were far up. Most of you get the right thing right. He's trying to talk to a certain group of people, and he's trying to support them while trying to fix something, right? He's trying to talk about how we got to fix something now, that there's a lot of work to do, things like that. Good. All right. So let's move on. What happens, though? April 14th, 1865, at Ford's Theater, Lincoln is assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. There was an attempted assassination on the Secretary of State, William Seward, but the Vice President, Andrew Johnson, will take the oath of office that night after he is shot. I believe Lincoln dies 3 days later. All you need to know is the date, who did it, when. This is a major blow. Funny thing about this assassination, though, John Wilkes Booth is a Southern sympathizer. He wants the South to win. He wants the South to succeed. That's why he does this. What he doesn't realize is that the South's best bets at getting out of this quickly and whole and without like intrusive policy and things like that are going to hurt the South was Lincoln. Cancel John Wilkes. Well, John Wilkes ends up not helping the South, but hurting them and killing Lincoln, because Lincoln is the guy that wants to forgive the regular people while only punishing the Confederates who caused this. Does that make sense? Like, yes, no? Like, that's Lincoln's overall goal. He wants to get everybody back into the Union, but he wants to keep out the real Confederates, right? Like the people who actually started this stuff. And so that's his goal. But when he dies, that goal kind of goes with him because everybody else has a different plan in mind. Johnson wants to get back at the wealthy landowners, even though he's a racist. He doesn't like wealthy landowners because he was a poor white guy in the South. And the radical Republicans want to punish all the slaveholders, right? So Lincoln's kind of the middle ground, and John Wilkes Booth will kill Lincoln, and that middle ground goes with him. So we're going to move on because it was short. Again, date, place, person, who did it. There was an attempt again on Secretary of State. That one did not succeed, though. Next president in line after Lincoln is Andrew Johnson, a Democrat. He only served one term. He was a wartime Democrat and a defender of poor whites because he grew up as one. He was not a member of the planter class. He actually didn't like the planter class. However, he was a white supremacist and a racist. And he dealt with Reconstruction, and he's the first president that got impeached. He's not a Jackson. Yeah, he's Johnson, Andrew Johnson. No, that's Jackson. Jackson's the one on the $20 bill. This is Andrew Johnson. He's the guy that got impeached. He's also the guy that messed up Reconstruction. He got impeached. You know, like when you try to fire the president? He's one of the only ones that got impeached. Him and Clinton. He had one job, he did. All right, so about another 30 seconds. This is a short one, right? You just need his name. You need to note he was a Southern Democrat, and he's one of the wartime Southern Democrats, so he's a weird one. Apparently I've fallen into meme territory. 20 seconds and we're moving on really short. Point out that he's a racist, by the way, because this is important. It's going to matter in a little bit. I'm not just, and I don't mean like casual racist like most people in 1865. I mean like real deal. All right, let's go to move forward. So a joint committee of 15 members of the House and Senate was put together to oversee Reconstruction. What do you need to know? You need the first bullet point. You can skip the second bullet point, but point out what do they recommend? They recommend the 14th Amendment, and they recommend the passage of Reconstruction Acts. Can somebody tell me in the chat, or you can shout it out, whichever one, what is the 14th Amendment? Remember what they do? This guy, we'll talk about him in a second. Citizens, right? Free citizens vote. So 13, 14, 15, free the slaves, 14 make them citizens, 15 let them vote, right? So free citizens vote. So good, yeah, it makes everybody born in the US a citizen, essentially. And then there's Reconstruction Acts that we'll get to probably tomorrow. I don't think we'll get to them today. That talk about that. So you need that first bullet point and you need that last one. What were their recommendations? This guy, write him down, write his name down, Thaddeus Stevens, a Republican from Pennsylvania. He is probably, I'm trying to think of how I can describe him. He is what you would call a radical Republican, and he's one of the leading radical Republicans. So write his name down, put leading radical Republican, and then underneath, I'm going to tell you really quickly what radical Republicans are, and you do need to write this down. So I'll give you about a minute again to get that first point, last point. This is after Lincoln's dead. This is after the war's over, and Congress puts together a group to talk about what can we do for this whole Reconstruction thing. How are we going to put the country back together? They recommend the 14th Amendment, and they recommend passing several Reconstruction Acts. So after this minute, I'll tell you about a radical Republican, so make sure you leave space for that. Write that in, radical Republicans. We're doing this one on the fly. It doesn't get a slide. But it is important. Oh, that's a wig, by the way. He's bald. So yeah, he barely has any eyebrows. If y'all watch the Lincoln movies, that's Tommy Lee Jones in that film. Nice, maybe. So here's what you're going to write. A radical Republican is an extreme believer in, radical Republican, extreme believer in, radical Republican, extreme believer in, and then I'm going to tell you the things. I'm going to list them out, right? Racial equality, abolition of slavery, punishment of the Confederates. Racial equality, abolition of slavery, punishment of the Confederates. It's not radical for now, but it was radical for then. The idea of make everybody equal make different races equal is crazy talk. Most moderate Republicans and moderate anybody does not support that idea. And if they don't actively speak up against it, they're definitely I guess, right? They're not a big fan of it. And so the group that believed this were known as radical Republicans. And there will be a time where they're in charge in Congress, actually. Yeah. So again, they believe in racial equality, the abolition of slavery, and the punishment of the Confederates. You might want to add in there somewhere that specifically we're talking about them during Reconstruction, right? I'm talking about radical Republicans during the period of Reconstruction, because after Reconstruction, for reasons that we will get into in the next couple of days, you'll see how that kind of changes. Even for the most, maybe not for the most extreme radicals, wow, sorry. Thaddeus Stevens, for example, is married to a black woman. He has I believe everybody thought she was his maid, but she was his wife. And so he's full in on this equality thing. but there are others who are not as full in as him. So let's go ahead and move forward. Let's talk about the Freedmen's Bureau. This is the last topic we are going to cover. I'm not much for making you write down lists, but you do need to write down this one. So, Bureau of Refugees and Freedmen and Abandoned Lands. March 3rd, 1865 is when they came into practice. They do not last long, but they do a lot with the time that they are there. They provided food, clothes, money, legal aid, which meant educated lawyers speaking for and on behalf of recently freed slaves. Labor contracts, ways to earn money and get a job. They built public schools and universities, and they also provided medical care for poor whites and for free blacks. So all former slaves and poor whites. They helped everybody. They were there to help everybody who was suffering after the war. This is the Freedmen's Bureau. They did a lot of really good work in a very short period of time. So you might want to add in there somewhere, right? A lot of great work, short period of time. I'll give you about 2 minutes for this one because you do need that whole list. Howard University is still around, for example. And the whole goal was to help people get back on their feet after something as devastating as a civil war. Well, they're not law enforcement, so not in that sense. You can shorten them to FB, that's fine, Freedmen's Bureau, but they're more they're like it's a help group. They're really unique. There's not a lot of examples I can pull from. Imagine like the Salvation Army mixed with, well, that's kind of it. They're kind of like the Salvation Army, but with teeth and with federal funding instead of private funding. About a minute left. If you need more time than that, let me know. But again, they did a lot in a very short amount of time, and it was all meant to help anybody, everybody, right? Because, hey, we're all in this together, equality, to get back on their feet after this. Gave them jobs, gave them land, fed people that didn't have the means, gave them clothes when they didn't have the means, helped teach them so that way they could do things like vote responsibly. Twenty seconds. So before I move on, what do you think about the Freedmen's Bureau, knowing that this is some of the stuff they did? And I'm not trying to lead you in any direction. This is just the truth. This is what they did. Good or bad for the Union, or good or bad for the South, I should say. And just type it in. Good or bad, yes, no. Good. Good or bad for the South, the Freedmen's Bureau. Good. Now, believe it or not, something that seems like it should be common sense good, right? Just based on the consensus here, had interpretations. So, if you're looking at some of these pictures and saying, hey, that's racist, because one of them is. This is from a Democrat running for office in 1865, Southern Democrat, claiming the Freedmen's Bureau as this horrible, horrible thing that Congress passed, even though the president vetoed it. It's bad, it's horrible, it hurts the white man, all this stuff. And this is a more, I would argue, accurate interpretation of the Freedmen's Bureau. So even something like the Freedmen's Bureau, who built schools, fed people, and all people, by the way, and gave them jobs and all that stuff, during this time, this very turbulent time in the US, specifically in the South, was split off. So I'm just pointing that out. So all you would need to add to your slide, right, is, or to your info on Freedmen's Bureau, some people saw it as a positive, others saw it as a negative. Paul, I'm going to assume you mean for the Southerner, and for a specific type of Southerner, I would say you're right. For a specific type of Southerner, they did see it as bad, and it didn't help them. Kind of. So what happens is, and we're going to get into this later on, who's heard the term carpetbagger? Anybody heard that term before? Yes, no, just really quick. Yes. So a carpetbagger, so the term carpetbagger, and there's another term called scalawag. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This is tomorrow talk, but I'm going to get into it a little bit today. Are what Southerners, specific type of Southerners, will call Northerners who try to come and change the South, or Southerners who support Northerners. So basically, like if you grew up in the South, but you're a Republican in 1865, they called you a scalawag, like you're trash, you're a horrible Southerner, you're a bad Southerner. Or if you were a Republican that moved to the South to try to change it, you were a carpetbagger. You're not from here. You're trying to mess it up. You're trying to change it. So it's not so much that they are considered bad. They are considered bad, but it's not that they're helping. It is that they're helping blacks. Actually, I'm trying to word it. It's not just that. It's everything. Desiree, it's like, it's not just helping, but it's literally like doing anything that's not Confederate is you're seen as bad in some way, negative in some way. And when we get into groups like the KKK that come out during this time, they don't care if you're white or black. They care if you're a Southerner who believes in Southern Confederate things, or if you're not, right? Like I'm using the parties again because it's the best way to explain it, right? If you thought along the lines of a Republican politically, whether you're white, whether you're black, doesn't matter. The KKK targeted you during a certain era that we'll get into. So that is it for notes today. I want to stop on this kind of dark note. Yeah, Paul, you're right. It does. So like, for example, if you're a landed, like this is a like wealthy landowner, Southern planter groups, definitely think that it's bad, right? Because it's helping not wealthy landowners get up on their feet and try to get equal ground. So you're definitely right there. That is a good point to make. So exit ticket is up. It is short. It is very, very simple. I'm going to show you what it is right now, tell you how to get through it. We have a good amount of time actually to finish it. So describe Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction and explain why Lincoln's doing it this way. So if I could describe Lincoln's plan in one word, and this is not how you should describe it, right? I would say his plan is lenient. I want you to tell me why it is. So first, describe the plan in detail and tell me why he picks to do it that way. Why is his plan so lenient? What's the purpose of the Freedmen Bureau? Was it supported? Yes, no. Be specific. And then what's the biggest obstacle in the way of Reconstruction? And why is this obstacle so significant? I know we haven't finished talking about Reconstruction, but there's at least 3 things you could pull from to talk about. What's the biggest problem Reconstruction faced? It could be something from really early on, like right as it's starting. It could be something a little later on. So that is your exit ticket. Got about 13 minutes to do it. And that is it for me. You could definitely put that, Janessa, as the answer for number 3. That could definitely be what